They had plodded on for about half an hour, 3 of them very stiff from yesterday's rowing, when Trumpkin suddenly whispered, "Stop!" They all stopped. "There's something following us," he said in a low voice, "or rather something keeping up with us, over there on the left." They all stood still, listening and staring till their ears and eyes ached. "You and I'd better each have an arrow on the string," said Susan to Trumpkin. The dwarf nodded, and when both bows were ready for action, the party went on again. They went a few dozen yards through fairly open woodland, keeping a sharp lookout. Then they came to a place where the undergrowth thickened and they had to pass nearer to it. Just as they were passing the place, there came a sudden something that snarled and flashed, rising out from the breaking twigs like a thunderbolt. Lucy was knocked down and winded, hearing the twang of a bowstring as she fell. When she was able to take notice of things again, she saw a great, grim-looking gray bear lying dead with Trumpkin's arrow in its side. "The DLF beat you in that shooting match, Sue," said Peter, with a slightly forced smile. Even he had been shaken by this adventure. I left it too late," said Susan, in an embarrassed voice. "I was so afraid it might be, one of our kind bears, a talking bear." She hated killing things. "That's the trouble of it," said Trumpkin. "When most of the beasts have gone enemy and gone dumb, but there are still some of the other kind left, you never know, and you daren't wait to see." "Poor old Bruin," said Susan. "You don't think he was?" "Not he," said the dwarf. "I saw the face and I heard the snarl. He only wanted little girl for his breakfast. And talking of breakfasts, I didn't want to discourage your majesties when you said you hoped King Caspian would give you a good one. But meat's precious scarce in camp, and there's good eating on a bear. It would be a shame to leave the carcass without taking a bit, and it won't delay us more than half an hour. I dare say you two youngsters, kings I should say, know how to skin a bear?" "Let's go and sit down a fair way off," said Susan to Lucy. "I know what a horrid, messy business that will be." Lucy shuddered and nodded. When they had sat down, she said, "Such a horrible idea has come into my head, Sue." "What's that?" "Wouldn't it be dreadful if some day in our own world at home men started going wild inside, like the animals here, and still looked like men, so that you'd never know which were which?" "We've got enough to bother about here and now in Narnia," said the practical Susan, without imagining things like that. When they rejoined the boys and the dwarf, as much as they thought they could carry off the best meat that had been cut off. Raw meat is not a nice thing to fill one's pockets with, but they folded it up in fresh leaves and made the best of it. They were all experienced enough to know that they would feel quite differently about these squashy and unpleasant parcels when they had walked long enough to be really hungry. On they trudged again, stopping to wash 3 pairs of hands that needed it in the first stream they passed, until the sun rose and the birds began to sing, and more flies than they wanted were buzzing in the bracken. The stiffness from yesterday's rowing began to wear off. Everybody's spirits rose. The sun grew warmer, and they took their helmets off and carried them. "I suppose we are going right," said Edmund about an hour later. "I don't see how we can go wrong as long as we don't bear too much to the left," said Peter. "If we bear too much to the right, the worst that can happen is wasting a little time by striking the great river too soon and not cutting off the corner." And again they trudged on with no sound except the thud of their feet and the jingle of their chain shirts. "Where's this bally rush got to?" said Edmund a good deal later. "I certainly thought we'd have struck it by now," said Peter, "but there's nothing to do but keep on." They both knew that the dwarf was looking anxiously at them, but he said nothing. And still they trudged on, and their mail shirts began to feel very hot and heavy. "What on earth?" said Peter suddenly. They had come without seeing it almost to the edge of a small precipice, from which they looked down into a gorge with a river at the bottom. On the far side the cliffs rose much higher. None of the party except Edmund, and perhaps Trumpkin, was a rock climber. "I'm sorry," said Peter. "It's my fault for coming this way. We're lost. I've never seen this place in my life before." The dwarf gave a low whistle between his teeth. "Oh, do let's go back and go the other way," said Susan. "I knew all along we'd get lost in these woods." "Susan," said Lucy reproachfully, Don't nag at Peter like that. It's so rotten, and he's doing all he can. And don't you snap at Sue like that either, said Edmund. I think she's quite right. Tubs and tortoise shells, exclaimed Trumpkin. I've got lost. If we've got lost coming, what chance have we got of finding our way back? And if we're to go back to the island and begin all over again, even supposing we could, we might as well give the whole thing up. Miraz will have finished with Caspian before we get there at that rate. You think we ought to go on? Said Lucy. I'm not sure the High King is lost, said Trumpkin. What's to hinder this river being the Rush? Because the Rush is not in a gorge, said Peter, keeping his temper with some difficulty. Your Majesty says is, replied the dwarf. But oughtn't you to say was? You knew this country hundreds, it may be 1,000 years ago. Mayn't it have changed? A landslide might have pulled off half the side of that hill, leaving bare rock. There are your precipices beyond the gorge. Then the Rush might go on, deepening its course year after year till you get the little precipices this side. Or there might have been an earthquake, or anything. I never thought of that, said Peter. And anyway, continued Trumpkin, even if this is not the Rush, it's flowing roughly north, and so it must fall into the great river anyway. I think I passed something that might have been it on my way down. So if we go downstream to our right, we'll hit the great river. Perhaps not so high as we'd hoped, but at least we'll be no worse off than if you'd come my way. Trumpkin, you're a brick, said Peter. Come on, then, down this side of the gorge. Look, look, cried Lucy. Where? What? Asked everyone. The lion, said Lucy. Aslan himself. Didn't you see? Her face had changed completely, and her eyes shone. Do you really mean? Began Peter. Where did you think you saw him? Asked Susan. Don't talk like a grown-up, said Lucy, stamping her foot. I didn't think I saw him. I saw him. Where, Lou? Asked Peter. Right up there, between those mountain ashes. No, this side of the gorge and up, not down, just the opposite of the way you want to go. And he wanted us to go where he was, up there. How did you know that was what he wanted? Asked Edmund. I just know, said Lucy, by his face. The others all looked at each other in puzzled silence. Her Majesty may well have seen a lion, put in Trumpkin. There are lions in these woods, I've been told, but it needn't have been a friendly and talking lion any more than the bear was a friendly and talking bear. Oh, don't be so stupid, said Lucy. Do you think I don't know Aslan when I see him? He'd be a pretty elderly lion by now, said Trumpkin, if he's one you knew when you were here before. And if it could be the same one, what's to prevent him have gone wild and witless like so many others? Lucy turned crimson, and I think she would have flown at Trumpkin if Peter had not laid his hand on her arm. The DLF doesn't understand. How could he? You must just take it, Trumpkin, that we do really know about Aslan, a little bit about him, I mean, and you mustn't talk about him like that again. It isn't lucky for one thing, and it's all nonsense for another. The only question is whether Aslan was really there. But I know he was, said Lucy, her eyes filling with tears. Yes, Lou, but we don't, you see, said Peter. There's nothing for it but a vote, said Edmund. All right, replied Peter. You're the eldest DLF. What do you vote for, up or down? Down, said the dwarf. I know nothing about Aslan, but I do know that if we turn left and follow the gorge up, it might lead us all day before we found a place where we could cross it. Whereas if we turn right and go down, we're bound to reach the great river in about a couple of hours. And if there are real lions about, we want to go away from them, not toward them. What do you say, Susan? Don't be angry, Lou, said Susan, but I do think we should go down. I'm dead tired. Do let's get out of this wretched wood into the open as quick as we can, and none of us except you saw anything. Edmund, said Peter. Well, there's just this, said Edmund, speaking quickly and turning a little red. When we first discovered Narnia a year ago, or 1,000 years ago, whichever it is, it was Lucy who discovered it first, and none of us would believe her. I was the worst of the lot, I know. Yet she was right after all. Wouldn't it be fair to believe her this time? I vote for going up. Oh, Ed, said Lucy, and seized his hand. And now it's your turn, Peter, said Susan, and I do hope— Oh, shut up and let a chap think, interrupted Peter. I'd much rather not have to vote. You're the High King, said Trumpkin sternly. Down, said Peter after a long pause. I know Lucy may be right after all, but I can't help it. We must do one or the other. So they set off to their right along the edge downstream, and Lucy came last of the party, crying bitterly.